The camera shutter clicked in steady rhythm as Major Robert Cowboy Stout's F-6F Hellcat carved through the tropical air at 8,000 feet. Below him, the island of Peleliu lay spread like a scarred jewel in the Pacific, its northern airfield supposedly abandoned, ravaged by weeks of bombing raids. Intelligence had been certain. The field was empty, dead, worthless. Stout banked slightly, adjusting his altitude for the photo run. September 12th. Disobey Sishisu. Another routine reconnaissance mission. Photograph the airfield. Return to USS Hornet. File the report. Grab some coffee. He'd done it 63 times before. This should have been number 64. Then he saw them. His breath caught in his throat. The airfield wasn't abandoned at all. It was alive with activity. Mitsubishi Zeros lined up in perfect rows, their wings almost touching. Nakaima bombers squatted like predatory birds. Ground crews swarmed around each aircraft like ants on sugar. Fuel drums stood stacked in neat pyramids between the planes. They weren't hiding. They were preparing. Stout's mind raced through the arithmetic of death. 40 aircraft. Maybe more. All fueled. All armed. All waiting. And he knew exactly what they were waiting for. In 3 days, 28,000 Marines would hit those beaches in one of the largest amphibious assaults the Pacific had ever seen. Those men would be vulnerable, exposed, packed into landing craft that couldn't maneuver or fight back. These 40 Japanese aircraft represented a massacre waiting to happen. The manual was clear. A reconnaissance pilot observes and reports. He doesn't engage, especially not alone, against an entire airfield bristling with anti-aircraft guns. With no wingmen, no backup, no support, Stout knew the procedure by heart. Circle higher. Get clear. Radio, the coordinates. Let command assemble a proper strike package. By the book. Safe. Correct. He also knew military bureaucracy. By the time he landed, debriefed, and headquarters organized a bombing mission, hours would pass. Maybe a full day. The Japanese would scatter these planes into hidden revetments. They'd camouflage them. Or worse, they'd launch them first, sending them against the fleet before any American bomber could reach the island. The Marines boarding those landing craft in 72 hours didn't have time for proper procedure. Stout climbed higher, studying the layout below with a tactician's eye. The Japanese had made a critical mistake. In their haste to prepare for the strike, they'd packed everything too close together. The aircraft sat wing to wing. The fuel drums stood exposed between them. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. One good hit could start a chain reaction. One spark could turn the entire airfield into an inferno. He checked his weapons. 650 caliber Browning machine guns. 2,400 rounds total. At maximum rate of fire, maybe 12 seconds of sustained shooting. Not nearly enough to destroy 40 aircraft individually, but enough to light one hell of a fuse. Robert Stout wasn't reckless. At 28 years old, he'd survived because he understood the difference between courage and suicide. He'd fought Zeros in dogfights. He'd attacked fortified positions under withering fire. He'd landed on carriers in storms that kept other pilots grounded. What he was considering now walked the razor's edge between bravery and madness. If he attacked, every gun on Peleliu would target him. He'd be alone, with no cover, no support. One lucky shot to his engine or cockpit would send him spiraling into the jungle with zero chance of rescue. The Japanese didn't take prisoners. Everyone knew that. But if he didn't attack, those 40 aircraft would launch in waves against the invasion fleet. They'd strafe the landing craft. They'd bomb the transports. They'd turn the beaches into a slaughterhouse before the Marines could even establish a foothold. He'd seen it happen at Tarawa. He'd watched Japanese bombers savage landing craft full of men who couldn't defend themselves, couldn't take cover, couldn't do anything but die. The decision took 30 seconds. Stout pushed the throttle forward and rolled into a dive. The altimeter unwound like a broken clock as he plummeted toward the jungle canopy. His strategy was simple and brutal. Come in fast. Come in low. Hit the fuel drums first. And get out before the anti-aircraft gunners could draw a bead on him. Speed was survival. Surprise was everything. At 2,000 feet, he leveled off, shoving the throttle to the firewall. The Hellcat's engine screamed in protest as he accelerated to nearly 400 miles per hour. Trees became a green blur beneath him. The airfield materialized suddenly through a gap in the foliage. Japanese ground crews looked up, their faces frozen in confusion as the American fighter roared overhead. Some dove for cover. Others simply stood there, paralyzed. None reached their guns in time. Stout lined up on the northern row of aircraft and squeezed the trigger. All 6 machine guns erupted simultaneously, their combined thunder drowning out even the engine's roar. Tracers streaked across the tarmac like angry red hornets, punching through the thin aluminum skin of a Zero. The fighter shuddered under the impacts, fuel spraying from ruptured tanks in a fine mist. He adjusted his aim and poured fire into the cluster of fuel drums stacked between 2 bombers. The drums simply disintegrated under the .50 caliber onslaught. Aviation fuel exploded in a massive fireball that engulfed both aircraft and reached 50 feet into the sky. The blast wave hit his Hellcat like a physical blow, rocking the aircraft as he pulled up hard. Behind him, the fire spread with terrifying speed. The first burning Zero ignited the plane parked beside it. That fire leaped to another, then another, each explosion feeding the next in an accelerating chain reaction. Within seconds, half the northern row was consumed by flames. Japanese ground crews scattered in all directions, abandoning any hope of saving the aircraft. Anti-aircraft gunners finally reached their positions and opened fire. Tracers arced past Stout's canopy like lethal fireflies. He felt impacts shudder through the airframe as 20mm rounds punched through his tail section. Warning lights flickered on the instrument panel, but the engine kept running strong. That was all that mattered. He banked hard right, gaining altitude and circling back around. Below, the devastation exceeded his most optimistic predictions. Nearly 20 aircraft were burning, the flames spreading across the tarmac like a river of liquid fire. Thick black smoke boiled into the sky, a funeral pyre visible for miles. But on the southern end of the field, at least 20 more aircraft sat untouched. Stout checked his ammunition. Half gone. Maybe 6 seconds of firing time left. The anti-aircraft gunners were ready now, tracking him as he circled, waiting for him to come back. Making a second pass was suicide. He rolled inverted and dove anyway. This time, the anti-aircraft fire was immediate and ferocious. The sky filled with tracers. He jinked left, then right, never holding a straight line long enough for the gunners to lead him properly. The Hellcat shuddered as more rounds found their mark, tearing metal somewhere in the fuselage. He ignored the damage indicators and focused on the target. Coming in from a different angle, he targeted the bombers on the southern end of the field. His remaining ammunition hammered into the aircraft, shredding control surfaces and puncturing fuel tanks. He walked his fire across a fuel truck, which exploded with enough force to flip a nearby bomber onto its back. The secondary explosions started immediately. Burning fuel from the truck spread to stacked ammunition crates, which detonated in a rapid staccato of blasts. The bomber's own ordnance cooked off, tearing the aircraft apart from within. Within moments, the southern row was burning as fiercely as the northern. His guns fell silent. Every round spent. The Hellcat felt sluggish as he pulled up, damaged control surfaces making her fight him. More warning lights blazed on the panel. Something was leaking, leaving a thin trail of smoke. But below him, the entire airfield was an inferno. Every aircraft, every fuel drum, every structure consumed by fire. The smoke column rose thousands of feet, marking the spot like a monument. Stout pointed the damaged Hellcat toward the ocean and nursed her back to USS Hornet. The hydraulics were failing, making the controls heavy and unresponsive. Oil pressure was dropping. He wasn't sure the landing gear would extend. But the engine was still running, and that was enough. The flight back felt longer than the attack. Adrenaline faded, replaced by the cold realization of what he'd done. He'd directly disobeyed orders. Court-martial was a real possibility, so was getting torn apart by every officer between him and the admiral. But the alternative, watching those 40 aircraft massacre the Marines, would have been worse than any punishment the Navy could hand down. The Hornet appeared on the horizon. Stout radioed the tower, reporting his situation. Aircraft damaged, landing gear uncertain, requesting priority landing. The carrier turned into the wind and cleared the deck. His gear extended, but only partially. One wheel wouldn't lock. He came in hot and caught the second wire. The damaged Hellcat slamming onto the deck hard enough to buckle metal. Deck crews swarmed the aircraft immediately, shocked at the damage. The tail section was shredded. The fuselage had over a dozen holes. The paint was scorched black from flying through explosions. Stout climbed down from the cockpit to face a crowd of officers. The air boss wanted to know why he'd returned with combat damage from a reconnaissance mission. The squadron commander wanted to know why he'd broken radio silence. The intelligence officer wanted to know what the hell had happened over Peleliu. Stout's report was simple. The airfield wasn't abandoned. It was packed with aircraft preparing to attack the invasion fleet. He destroyed them, all of them. 40 aircraft gone in 8 minutes. The officers stared at him. The intelligence officer asked him to repeat the number. 40 aircraft destroyed by one pilot in a single pass seemed impossible. Reconnaissance photos the next day confirmed it. The northern airfield at Peleliu was completely destroyed. Not a single aircraft remained operational. Aerial photographs showed the burned-out hulks of exactly 40 Japanese planes scattered across blackened tarmac. Fuel dumps were craters. Structures were rubble. Intelligence officers revised their assessment of Japanese air strength on Peleliu. Instead of facing 40 aircraft on D-Day, the Marines would hit the beaches with complete air superiority. The Japanese air threat had been eliminated by one pilot who'd refused to follow orders. The Navy awarded Stout the Navy Cross, the service's second highest decoration for combat valor. The citation praised his extraordinary heroism and aggressive fighting spirit in attacking superior enemy forces alone. His decision to engage had directly saved American lives. The Battle of Peleliu that followed was brutal regardless. The Marines landed on September 15th, and immediately faced some of the most intense fighting in the Pacific War. Japanese forces had fortified the island's coral ridges and caves, turning every position into a deadly stronghold. The battle lasted over 2 months and cost nearly 2,000 American lives. Yet without Stout's attack, the casualties would have been catastrophic. Those 40 Japanese aircraft would have attacked during the vulnerable first hours of the invasion when Marines were packed in landing craft and transport ships. Air attacks on amphibious assaults were devastating because troops couldn't take cover or maneuver. Military historians later calculated that Stout's solo attack probably saved between 500 and 1,000 Marine lives in the first day alone. After the war, Stout returned to California and lived quietly. He rarely spoke about what he'd done over Peleliu. His children grew up knowing their father had served in the Pacific, but they didn't learn the details until decades later. The Navy Cross sat in a drawer, not displayed on any wall. Friends who knew him described a man uncomfortable with attention or praise. When asked about the attack, he'd downplay it. "I saw planes that needed destroying, so I destroyed them," he'd say. Any pilot would have done the same, but not every pilot would have. Most would have followed orders, radioed back, and let command handle it through proper channels. That bureaucratic approach would have given the Japanese time to scatter their aircraft or launch them. Stout's willingness to disobey orders and trust his own judgment made the difference. His story remained largely unknown outside military aviation circles, until historians rediscovered the mission reports decades later. When researchers cross-referenced his Navy Cross citation with Japanese records and aerial photos, they realized the full significance of what he'd accomplished. One man, one aircraft, 8 minutes, 40 enemy planes destroyed, potentially 1,000 lives saved. The attack demonstrated something military strategists study to this day: the value of initiative at the tactical level. Stout couldn't have known for certain that his decision was correct. He was guessing about Japanese plans, gambling that his assessment of the threat was accurate, and betting his life on his ability to execute the attack. Everything about the situation argued for caution. Follow orders. Report back. Let someone higher up decide. But Stout understood that sometimes the person on the ground seeing the situation with their own eyes has better judgment than commanders looking at maps miles away. His willingness to trust his own assessment, even when it meant directly disobeying orders, embodied the principle of commander's intent. The Navy hadn't ordered him to attack that airfield, but they had sent him to protect the invasion force. He understood the intent behind his mission and adapted when circumstances demanded it. The Navy recognized this in awarding him the Navy Cross rather than court-martialing him. They understood that rigid adherence to orders would have resulted in disaster. Modern fighter pilots study Stout's attack in tactical training courses, not just for the flying skills it demonstrated, but for the decision-making under pressure. The military teaches that sometimes following orders to the letter means missing opportunities that won't come again. The attack also demonstrated perfect target prioritization. Stout didn't waste ammunition trying to destroy 40 aircraft individually. He identified the fuel drums as the critical vulnerability and exploited it. One bullet in the right place accomplished more than 1,000 bullets in the wrong places. His approach, from multiple angles, coming in low and fast to minimize exposure to anti-aircraft fire, showed tactical sophistication beyond simply pointing and shooting. He'd analyzed the defenses, planned his attack runs, and executed them despite taking damage. And, critically, he'd known when to stop. After expending his ammunition, he didn't loiter trying to assess damage or looking for additional targets. He got out. All of these decisions happened in seconds under fire, with no time for careful deliberation. Stout's training and experience let him make split-second choices that each proved correct. Robert Cowboy Stout died in 2005 at the age of 89. His family finally shared his story publicly. and military historians rushed to preserve the details before they were lost. The mission reports, reconnaissance photo, and Navy Cross citation all confirmed what seemed almost too dramatic to believe. In the final analysis, Stout's attack over Peleliu stands as one of the most successful solo strikes in naval aviation history. No other single pilot destroyed as many enemy aircraft in one mission during World War II. His 8 minutes of combat prevented what would have been a devastating air attack on the Peleliu invasion. The Marines who landed on those beaches never knew that a Navy pilot had disobeyed orders to save their lives. They fought through hell on that coral island, facing Japanese defenders in fortified positions that turned every yard of ground into a battle. But at least they didn't face 40 aircraft strafing them as they tried to reach shore. Sometimes the most heroic thing a soldier can do is refuse to follow orders, not out of cowardice or rebellion, but because the situation demands action that rigid adherence to procedure would prevent. Stout understood this instinctively. When confronted with a choice between doing what he was told and doing what needed to be done, he chose the mission over the orders. His legacy lives in every tactical training course that teaches initiative over obedience, adaptation over rigidity, and trust in the judgment of people on the ground. The military learned from Stout and pilots like him that sometimes the best course of action is the one nobody ordered you to take. The next time you face a situation where following the rules seems wrong, where rigid procedure conflicts with obvious necessity, remember Cowboy Stout circling over that airfield. He knew what needed to happen. He knew it would cost him if he was wrong. And he did it anyway, because the alternative was worse.